Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's Policy and Resources Committee of Worcester City Council. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note, this meeting is recorded and streamed live. The recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Appointment of substitutes.
Yes, sorry, I've got the microphone with me, but Karen Holmes is here for Jessica Jagger, and Hannah Cooper is here for Lena Ryan.
Thank you very much. So that brings us, the next item is declarations of interest. And I wondered whether it's possible to give advice. It occurred to me that the paper on governance arrangements, because that we've all got an interest in it, and potentially chairs or vice chairs might have a pecuniary interest.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for raising this. My advice would be that a chair who may be participating in the room shouldn't consider themselves to have a pecuniary interest. They may consider themselves to have an ordinary interest, but I don't consider it's sufficiently close enough to warrant a declaration of pecuniary interest, which means they can't participate. There's a more general principle around being able to participate in discussion around governance. Later on, when we vote on members' allowances, for example, at full council, we always grant members all a dispensation to be able to vote on the principle of allowances, and I think the same principle would apply to a discussion around governance. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other declarations of interest? Okay, thank you. So then we got the minutes of the meeting that took place on the 17th of December. If I go through those, if anybody wants to make any corrections or has any issues with them. Page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. So committee's content that I sign those as an accurate record of that meeting. Thank you. So then that takes us on to the draft medium-term financial plan, draft budget and capital programme.
Thank you, Chair. So I'll provide an overview of the report, hopefully covering the salient points, and the report in essence identifies the progress made in setting the budget since the December committee meeting. So within the report, section 3 identifies a number of priorities, and the key one is to set a realistic and balanced budget for the next financial year, which is achievable, sustainable, and is able to withstand financial pressures. Section 4 of the report identifies the key financial assumptions which are based on known and expected changes and include assumptions on our council tax setting, a revised position on business rates, price inflation, salary increases, interest rates, etc. And based on these assumptions, the revised budget gap for 25-26 stands at 0.9 million. However, rather than balance a budget through the use of reserves, it is proposed to balance a budget by the use of a financial sustainability plan, which I'll touch on later. In the report, sections 1 sections 5.1 to 5.6 provide information from the local government's financial settlement, which, as described, was not as beneficial as we had originally forecasted. Section 6 provides financial headlines and identifies some of the significant issues, including several cost pressures, which include increased vehicle maintenance costs, software licensing and pressures on our housing benefits subsidy. All of these have been discussed during the 24-25 reporting. Our main income streams including our assumptions for car parking, trade and garden waste collection, the bereavement service and planning income are also identified. The draft capital programme is also highlighted here and includes areas such as new vehicles, the cremators, improvements at the crematorium, improvements at Purdyswell, the wheelie bin replacements, DFGs, ICT infrastructure, and of course the ongoing projects within the Future High Streets Fund and the Future High Streets and the Towns Fund. Section 7.1 of the report provides a reconciliation between the budget gap for 25-26 when the budget was set in 2024 and what it looks like now, including the use of the Financial Sustainability Plan. Section 8 of the report identifies some of the future challenges that the authority faces. In terms of the Financial Sustainability Plan, this is attached as Appendix 3 and it provides some details about how the 25-26 deficit is to be met, and this is by a combination of grant utilisation and some additional reductions in the Council's cost base which will have to be delivered in a sustainable way. It also references the need for a longer-term transformational strategy to ensure that the authority is as resilient as it can be in what is an ever-changing financial landscape. On that note, Chair, taking into account the recommendations at the beginning of the report, I'll hand back to you and hopefully answer questions from the committee.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the update. You say it's kind of an evolving picture as government announcements have come out and calculations have taken place as to what the impact on our budget and our council. So if I can invite questions or comments. Louis?
I'd like to ask a question about the capital programme, in particular the line that we've got in the Appendix 2, which is solar panels on St Martin's Gate car park. I'm going to ask a question, but I think I know the answer anyway, but I'd like it to be discussed in public. What we can see in the report is there's £463,000, which is in the 24-25 budget. And I just want to check that my understanding is correct, that money, although it's in the financial year that ends in April of this year, if we don't spend that money before April this financial year, that money won't go away. It'll still be sitting there, ready to be spent when a suitable plan comes forward, when we've had the chance for the new costs and quotations to be created and so on. So at some point when that comes back, we'll be able to discuss that in a future P&R and hopefully be able to put that forward because the money hasn't been lost out of the budget.
So anything that's in the capital programme for 24-25 and hasn't been spent in 24-25, during the course of the 24-25 reporting, there will be a request to carry forward unspent capital allocations. So if that's the case with the solar panels at St Martin's Gate, 460,000 will be brought forward into 25-26. And my understanding with that specifically is that the business case that was looked at in September wasn't approved at that stage, and the head of property services is looking at a new business case to come forward to a committee meeting at a later date.
So in short, if the business case is proven at that point, whenever that is, in a few months' time perhaps, we'll be able to decide it on its own merits because the money will still be there. That's right.
That's right, yeah.
Thank you. Good. Thank you.
Thank you for the report. I wanted to pick up with a couple of questions. Sal mentioned the financial sustainability plan will be for planning the long-term transformation of this council. And obviously, it feels like a slightly strange situation to be into planning the long-term transformation of this council when we are have limited time left. So I'm wondering if that changes the decisions, or should change the decisions we're making in that financial sustainability plan, considering, you know, we don't have a long-term future as a council. And the other question was on point 6.2 on page 13 of the agenda pack. It mentions that IT shared services are showing an increase of 47,000, which includes the impact of increased employees' national insurance contributions. So my understanding was that councils are going to be compensated for any increase in NICs for directly employed employees. And while I know the shared service is not employed by Worcester, it is employed by a partner council. So I would hope that they would be compensated for those increased NICs.
Okay, take the second question first. So the budgets we've been given by the authorities that manage those shared services have included the national insurance increase, and they've done the same for their own salary forecasts. And their position is that they're waiting for the fine detail to come from government before they make those adjustments, which will take that cost down. So we're expecting a reduction in those fees, and within the table that's provided in section 7.1, it does make reference to the reimbursement from central government and the fact that those increases should change. So hopefully we'll have that detail before the budget is set. If not, that will be a small adjustment that will come through in the 25-26 outturn.
I think that's really helpful. And actually, it was a question that I was potentially going to ask as well, because I've been in too many different briefings with District Council Network and the Ministry and others, and the Minister was saying, you know, how to calculate the impact of the increase in national insurance contributions. They've had to do it as a relatively kind of rough and ready mechanism, depending on, you know, on the data that's available between councils, and have used a sort of service return that councils are obliged to make. So presumably that's where, as you say, those staff are employed within a council, which is a different calculation than for an outsourced service.
Yeah, that's right. So the likes of our leisure provider, that's outsourced, and they will have to absorb that increase. It just so happens that some authorities have taken the decision to include the increase within their budget and not the actual reimbursement from government until they have all that fine detail. It's just a choice that they've taken strategically at that authority. That includes Malvern and Wychavon.
And maybe we as a committee, and trying to balance our budget, can kind of make a strong recommendation that, you know, we aren't disadvantaged because of shared services that are hosted by authorities that are financially better off than we are.
Thank you. I'd like to pick up the other question that was raised. As Lynn said, you know, we were both at a briefing today. The most recent of, I don't know how many briefings, and one of the questions that is live at the moment, and they change daily, is with regard to debt of the existing councils and what will happen to that debt in terms of the successor bodies. And so I think partly trying to answer your question, you know, we don't know yet if our transition is going to take place in 27, 28 or 28, 29 or whenever. You know, there's still some significant uncertainty. But if I refer to Appendix 1, you'll see that, as Sal has said, the deficit for the coming year is just over £900,000. If you look at 27, 28, which could be the earliest point at which we transition into a new local authority. So in 27-28, our deficit is 2.6 million. And at the moment, there is an acknowledgement that there is an issue in terms of any successor bodies inheriting debt from existing bodies, but there is no answer to the question. So at the moment, as it stands, if the transition was to be 27-28, we would be passing over a debt of £2.6 million to the successor body. Now, I think it's fair to say, and I don't want to put words in any of your mouths, it's not for me to do that, but from an officer perspective, you know, we will have great pride in passing over a going concern. You know, we don't want to, none of us want to pass over a bust council. But there is still an unanswered question as to, is a debt going to be allowed, first of all? So in other words, we don't even know, because we haven't received any guidance yet, as to whether we will be expected to pass over a balanced budget at the point of transfer, or even if subsequent years within an ongoing MTFP also have to be balanced at the point of transfer. We don't know that. And so we also don't know if what would happen if we don't balance the budget at that point. There was some suggestion that the successor body, the government might allow the successor body to write off the debt. I doubt very much if that is the case, but you could find in some parts of the country, I'm sorry this is a bit long-winded, last sentence, I promise, you could find in some parts of the country that almost on day one, the successor body is pretty close to the edge financially, particularly if it's inherited a very, very large county council deficit, as well as a large number of district council deficits. So I think the answer is that we are, I was going to say ploughing on regardless, but I think what we are doing, we are endeavouring to maintain a balanced budget as business as usual, I think is the phrase, until such time as we would get any guidance to suggest otherwise. I think as officers, our recommendation would be to be prudent and manage the budget in the way that Sally's setting out in the report. Thank you.
Just coming back briefly, I just wanted to clarify with Sal's, thank you very much, David, for the answer. On Sal's point about not including NICs, just to be clear, so our estimates do include the reimbursement from government for the city council's budget.
For the city councils, yes. Not at this moment in time, it doesn't include an adjustment for the shared services.
Okay, got other comments or questions? Got Jabba, then Pat.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously a very difficult time in terms of City Council finances at the moment, and I think it's appropriate, as the Managing Director has spoken, in terms of just drawing a parallel with the situation up at County in terms of the financial position that they do find themselves in terms of how they have managed their finances through one can only say without the tightest of financial controls in place in terms of letting that budget to control. Given outside factors and other factors aside, the ideological position of not raising appropriate sources of funding, whichever form that may take in, has proved disastrous up at County Hall and has left them in a situation. And some of those members were part of this administration, you know, not too long ago, and when faced with a position of a slight surplus, didn't save it for a rainy day and decided to spend it how they decided to spend it, and although that was a political choice, but we find ourselves bearing the the brunt of those decisions taken 2 or 3 years ago in the financial situations that we find today, hence why we're making these difficult choices at this moment. I know members have already mentioned and have an eye on future spending of unallocated or unspent money that's been on that, but is that a position that we should be looking to at the moment, considering we're facing a 2.96 million budget by the end of life as we know it as a city council? In that, I mean, I'm not sure that would be a prudent position and a financially sound position. And I admire and commend the managing director in the position that he's taking, that actually, if life as we know it as a city council is going to end, then we want to be handing it over in a financially sound and good position, and that's the responsible thing to do. And I think as this administration here around this table, where we should be looking at actually managing it as best as we can, and hence the tough choices that we are going to be facing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I concur with what Jabbar's just said. I think the people of Worcester expect us to manage their money wisely. And it is their money as much as anyone's, We're just here making the decisions, but we're making them on behalf of the people of Worcester who do expect prudence and who have, over the years, experienced that from us, I hope, on this side of the chamber. It hasn't always been the case with other parties, and it has been a bit of a struggle at times. But I think we're in a reasonable position, as reasonable as we can get to. As a matter of detail, I think the only other question I want to ask is really about Appendix 3 in the homelessness prevention grant and so forth. It looks to me as if what you're proposing there is directly offsetting the 200k against the overspend that we've experienced there, which is of course demand-led. It's not something we can control easily. In the past, we have actually bought premises to be able to offer housing to people who are homeless instead of B&B. I'm assuming we're not actually thinking of that at the moment. We are actually looking at directly offsetting this money against the overspend. Is that right?
Thank you, Chair. No, it's a twin track approach. So we are still acquiring property other than. Yeah, absolutely. We've done quite a bit of work over the last 12 months to understand where our costs around temporary accommodation and in particular housing subsidy loss is occurring, and yeah, we absolutely are looking to explore every route to have access to property other than B&B and hotels, and that's having some impact. But as you say, it is so demand-led that we still have this big number that we're tackling. So that's why we're looking to utilise more homeless prevention grant to offset the cost of that.
Thank you. That's really reassuring that actually we are taking a twin track approach, because I think that's the right one.
Thank you, Chair. My point is about garden waste. It says the income from garden waste collections has grown year on year, but for some reason we're not assuming further growth. I was wondering whether we are normally pessimistic when we look at growth with this kind of thing, but we turn out at the end of the year that we have done better than we thought. Thank you.
I think the calculations is based on a more of a prudent approach than an optimistic one. We'll probably start to see, we've seen some of our income targets, generally speaking, being challenged towards the latter part of 24-25, and that's continued to be the case right now. So in terms of setting the budget, I think it's wiser under the circumstances to set something prudent. If we prove to be overly pessimistic, then that's good. It won't have a massive impact, but it's something that then will be some additional income for 25-26, and then we can include it in the budget provision for 26-27.
I've just got a little further question about that. So when we look at garden waste, do we look at, do we link it with planning where we see the number of houses being built and the potential growth from extra housing in the city?
I don't think we do that for garden waste because the impact is not that significant, but we do look at that when it comes to the council tax base and the predictions for future years. So if the income is significant, our council tax changes, and that does take into account some of the longer term planning policy decisions, but we know we are constrained in terms of the amount of housing growth that we have within the city boundaries anyway from planning, so the impact isn't that significant, councillor, and that's reflected in the sort of really small amounts we get through from new homes bonus, so 30-odd thousand pounds this year. You know, some councils are getting over £1 million, and it's a drop in the ocean, and that's down to the constraints we have.
Chair, thank you. Just a very quick comment. I would just like to say on behalf of this council really how proud I am of us and of our prudent financial management. You look at the county council, they got a 33.6 million budget gap and no building, no HQ, and we're nowhere near in that position. So well done us. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to speak again, Gemma?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I think the other thing this report highlights is actually the amount of non-statutory stuff that actually this council delivers upon, and that we've been consistently going above and beyond our you know, the absolute minimum level of stuff that we're doing. We're an ambitious council, we're an achieving council, and we set ourselves a high bar to achieve. But the sad reality of some of that is in the current financial circumstances that some of those stuffs that we do above and beyond may not be delivered in the same way as it was kind of before. So huge commendations to all the officers that and our frontline workers that actually deliver on that, and consistently we've been one of the happiest, one of the best, one of the safest, one of the, in terms of quality of living and in terms of quality of life as well, in terms of that, and that's a collective effort, whether that's a political one or whether it's an officer level one, and there's a huge level of detail in this MTFS that reflects that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, if I can kind of make a few comments myself before we actually formally take the recommendations. Yeah, I mean, looking at the capital programme, you know, that is an illustration of the ambition of this council and our investment in Worcester City. And, you know, we are delivering a huge amount. We are delivering as the sort of cultural and economic hub for the whole county and for our neighbours. And of course that is the challenge, isn't it, that we have constrained city boundaries and therefore constraints in our council tax base, and our neighbouring authorities come into Worcester, and the level of city services that people expect to come into our city. We have the vibrant nighttime economy, you know, so our staff, we have members of staff who have to work evenings and so on, and when people come into work in the morning, they expect our streets to be clean and clear of what may have been left over from the night before. And, you know, and it's a challenge, you know, how we balance cleaning the riverside following the floods, following the mud, versus cleaning the high street for the morning workers, versus kind of policing, you know, parts of the nighttime economy. So, and our neighbouring authorities don't have that. So, you know, well done to our staff and well done to a lot, but I think it is important that people understand the additional challenge of being the urban centre for the county, and that we are the cathedral city and the university city. So that's that point I wanted to make. Also, I thought I'd kind of a chance to give a plug. So we were looking, Karen mentioned, the garden waste. So paragraph 6.4, the income sources, to put in a plug for our trade waste teams. No, I'm really proud and pleased that that is a service that we deliver within the council. Chance to put a reminder out and a plug to businesses that food waste, for businesses, commercial food waste is required from this April, and we as a council are geared up. We can provide that service in line with legislation, and a bit of a kind of a sort of a shame factor. So local businesses who actually are buying their trade waste from out of the county, out of the city, if they're committed to Worcester, maybe actually look at and review that. It was mentioned to me quite a high profile organisation, whom I won't name, but invest in Worcester, and it all helps make the most for our city. I think probably that's covered most of the items. So to go formally to the recommendations, committee notes the progress made against preparing the draft medium-term financial plan for 2025 to 2030 and the proposed draft budget and capital programme, and approves the financial sustainability plan to balance the budget for 25-26, and that the committee notes that the proposals will be updated for any agreed changes following further work undertaken by officers, the budget consultation with members, and for any further relevant changes made by government. Formal adoption of the MTFP and the budget and council tax for next financial year will be recommended to full council for approval on the 18th of February. All those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. Is anybody against those recommendations? Are there some abstentions? We have 2 abstentions from the Lib Dems. Okay, I think everyone else was in favour. Thank you very much. So next item on the agenda is review of the council's governance arrangements.
Thank you, Chair. The committee will remember that we embarked on a review of the council's governance arrangements, and we did quite a piece of work around this at the end of last year. Since we committed to doing the review, obviously the landscape has changed, and the proposals now that we may be reorganised do rather put a different lens on the approach. So what I've brought to you tonight is the composite set of work completed to date. In discussion with group leaders, we've paused the piece of work that we were going to commence in relation to scrutiny workshop and some intervention from the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. We could reinstate that at any time if we wanted to, but I think we've spoken, group leaders and deputies and the officer leadership team about workload, about priorities, and about everyone's focus for the time being. So this governance review really reflects on the matters that we were discussing at the end of last year, and seeks a steer really on where we go from here. So you'll recall that where we got to was some terms of reference were signed off by the full council, and group leaders and officers had a dialogue, and a request was made to understand what officers' priorities were from the review. I report here that there was about 15 officers involved in a sort of workshop approach. The overall theme was around workload driven by the committee system. There were a number of aspects to that. So this is only a part of the governance review. This was just, a significant part of it, but it was just the kind of workload aspect. And that broke down into 10 proposals for discussion the understanding being that those proposals would go no further if they receive no support. Again, the report then walks through each of those proposals and looks at where the balance of views was. What I would say was there was a high level of consensus across the political groups and councillors in our city council. And in governance terms, I think that's quite consistent, actually. There's often a lot of commitment to the governance, the processes we have across the chamber, so that lots of common points were made by lots of different types of people. And actually, in a sense, that's really healthy as well, isn't it, to have taken that sounding. So I don't propose to go through them all individually, Chair. You'll see that a number of them fall away immediately because they enjoy no support. So, for example, changing the approach to motions and questions, members want to keep that as is. Start time of meetings, members want to keep that as it is. Some simple forward plan, members would like that. So there are some things which are just either a clear yes or no. The area really to come back on was this overall point about, is there a way of reducing the amount of committee meetings that we all find ourselves in without losing the value of the approach that we've developed through the committee system. In terms of specific proposals about reorganising policy committees from 5 into 3, the feedback was mixed. There was sympathy, but there wasn't a unanimous support for where we might make a saving in time across that committee. So there were as many suggestions in one way as there were in another. So I can't present a united proposal on that. Again, I think the idea that we might separate out scrutiny is sort of, I might suggest, is sort of parked pending wider conversations about reorganisation. But in the absence of any clear agreement as to what do we do, if members don't steer offices in any other direction, then offices will simply programme all the things that we've programmed up to date for the next municipal year. And I suppose it's that point that it would be helpful to have another discussion about whether we do that tonight in this room. You see in the report, I'm seeking a delegation to work with group leaders to try and see if there's something practical we can agree for the next 12 months, which does enjoy sufficient support. I mean, our approach to governance matters has been for all the groups to agree on matters previously, and I think that's stood us in good stead. So, you know, I think it's quite a high bar, but I think it's a good approach if we can. And then obviously, in a more practical sense, if it's possible to look at the number of committee meetings that we schedule in. I think that would be just in terms of numerically, whether we're routinely scheduling 5 every year, if it can be 4, if it can be 3. And then obviously within that context of not just standing up meetings for the sake of it, officers have specifically recommended that standards could come within Audit and Governance Committee. That doesn't mean that standards would never meet as a committee. Instead, the proposal would be that there is always scheduled 1 annual standards meeting per year. And of course, the subcommittee would be stood up if there was a complaint to consider as well. Chair, that's probably as far as I want to take it today. There are a number of other points in there, but largely they're housekeeping. And they're, as I say, I think this point about how we set the next year's municipal calendar is probably the most crucial one.
Yes, because I guess officers will be looking at the committee cycle for the next financial year and the next civic year. And I think hopefully everybody is really conscious that every single meeting, takes up time and resource and officer time, and that an officer time is the most precious resource that we do have in order to deliver for this council. So if we can do some things to streamline that, and also conscious of the demand on the time of elected members. I think sometimes some of us feel we spend rather too many evenings here, or it puts potential candidates, potential kind of good councillors off standing. So it's a balance, isn't it? And it's right that we review it. Comments? Chris, I've got Louis first.
Thank you, Lynn. I definitely agree with pretty much everything you just said there. I think it just makes sense to obviously use the resources in a better way. My only concern is that I agree with very much the spirit and also the detail of what Sian has presented tonight. But if we don't discuss the specifics of the committees and about some of the consolidations that are being thought about, well, how will we do that? And I guess it's a tricky subject to do, and I don't know how we should do it. But if we don't do it now, when and how are we going to do this? Because when we get to perhaps, when we come to the next annual council, we don't want to be in a rush of trying. I mean, I think we've had this in the past, and we're at an annual council trying to decide what the committees are. We don't want to be in that position again. So I think we've definitely got to do something before we get to May's annual council. So I just want to agree with the spirit of it, and I just want to sort of explore going forward how will we take these things forward, and how will we decide? What's the mechanism, do you think?
Through you, Chair. I suppose simply the mechanism that I'm proposing is that the group leaders advise me, based on some options that I'll produce, as to which is likely to find favour, and then where we have that consensus, if we have that consensus, that will form the basis of a report that will just simply recommend to a council meeting, as you say, before the annual council meeting, what next year is going to look like. And I guess in a sense there's a simple choice to be made. There's probably, at the high level, there's probably 3 options to consider straight away. Status quo, blending existing policy committees, or keeping the 5 policy committees as is in name and looking at the number of meetings that those policy committees have. So I think at a very high level, those are the 3 most obvious options in terms of the work. You've obviously seen all the background papers as part of the governance review. It's the workload driven through the policy agenda that's probably the area where we could have the most influence. But those would be the 3 options. As is, blending the 5 into a fewer number of policy committees, keeping with 5, but reducing the number of times those meet.
If I could just reply on that as well. So I agree with that, and I think it's probably the best way to go. But I guess what I'm sort of saying is that we probably better not leave it too late, because this is going to sound perhaps a little bit of a crazy thing to say, but of course people have lives and they need to know when their meetings are. So some people, including the staff and other councillors, will probably want to know when they can book their holidays or whatever. So if the meetings go from 5 meetings a year to 3 of a committee, that will have an influence on when the dates are and stuff. So we've got real world life things going on, haven't we? So we need to get on with it. Yeah, get your holidays sorted out. So, yeah.
So have you got any specific proposals you wanted to put now, or you want this to be on the agenda for specific proposals for the next leaders meeting?
I guess really what I'm saying is let's try to perhaps we should try to do something perhaps within the next month, so by the end of February. Let's try and agree that we're going to try to do it fairly soon rather than leaving it too late, so that because it's going to make things difficult for the committee services and all sorts of people if we don't try and pin things down a little bit. So just encouraging us really to get on with it. That's the next month. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't read that section. Sorry, I did read the section. I didn't read that section in such a way that there were still 3 options. But having said that, I pretty much welcome the 5 committees, but with reduced meeting counts. Love meetings, can't have enough of them. But a reduced meeting count would be useful. And I completely agree as well with the transparency of the forward plan that the committees are going to do. But can I just make a special plea for the unpublished version, is that it's published a bit more regularly than it is to everybody that deserves a copy. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my reckoning is that we're a busy council with a lot of decisions that need to be made, and without a change in the schemes of delegation or the establishment of subcommittee or task groups, there will still be a need for the committees to meet and make decisions, and I would be cautious about reducing the numbers of opportunities for decisions to be made.
unless you can demonstrate that we're sitting around talking about nothing, then I think my caution would be to keep committees as they are. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. And I wanted to just pick up on one of the points on the meeting times. I know we are an outlier starting at 7 p.m, but I wanted to say thank you to officers for facilitating that, because I think it does allow us to have a wider range of people on the council, because, you know, with my own kids and having swimming lessons at 6 o'clock, I just simply couldn't make a meeting starting at 6. So I'm certainly very grateful for that. I think there's a suggestion there to merge health and wellbeing into communities, and I know that sometimes our communities meetings can go quite late in the evening, but if there's a balance to be struck there so that there's fewer meetings happening total, even if sometimes the communities meetings are a bit longer, then I'm not opposed to that. And my final comment I wanted to make was just possibly this is a recency bias, as I went on some LGA training at the weekend for audit committees, which I'm sure everyone knows about LGA training already, but it's very good. And one of the things that was raised there was a link to the LGA's 10 questions for audit committees. And as the only member of audit here, I just wanted to highlight this particular point, which was the first question is, how can we be a more effective audit committee? And in it, contained in that answer is the audit committee is most effective when it is unencumbered by other tasks such as scrutiny, general purposes, or standards. Now, obviously, I understand that luckily, we're not a council that is encumbered by a lot of standards issues, I hope. So I think, you know, I'm willing to accept having standards put into it, but just be aware that the audit committee already has in some ways, a difficult job with the lack of external audit we have at the moment to try and make sure that we have are able to provide to full council the assurance that is necessary that everything's going well. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we were aware of that point before we move forward.
Thank you, Chair. I welcome this review, and we do need change. Sean knows, because I told her, I actually took her papers with me and I read them in the train all the way up to Harrogate, thoroughly enjoyed reading them and made lots of notes, and then never got the time to do anything more with it while I was in Harrogate, when I thought I'd have lots of time. But you don't have lots of time, you're just busy all the time while you're there. And then I managed to miss the meeting when it was discussed, so because I was away. Yeah, I was wondering what's going to happen with the budgets of the meetings do they get transferred with to you know, with health and wellbeing's budget, because that money is quite vital and needed. How can we address, for instance, there's lots of reports that are forwarded for noting, and they're interesting, the debate points, but maybe as we're not voting on them, maybe they could be taken maybe as consideration not to, but they need to come out into the public. So we need to consider how we get them into the public, how we get a chance to debate them, even though they are for noting. So maybe some more succinctness in there, because certainly, as Alex has pointed out, you know, we're here quite late on a communities night. If we're adding in the points that need to be addressed for health and wellbeing as well, that's going to make a very lengthy meeting. But I believe that's how it was before I joined the council prior to 2021. It was not a separate committee. Yeah. So yes, I think it's something we need to do, and as Lou said, before the end of February, because we've only got March and April to put it in place.
Through you, Chair, thanks. In response to the question about budgets, yes, I mean, I suppose I've chosen the word blend. So functions would be blended together, budgets would come together. You're quite right in saying health and wellbeing previously used to be a function of communities. And also there's probably some proverbial phrase that would cover that human behaviour, that the first agenda item always takes an hour, whatever it is. I think we would need to have a conversation about agenda management with chairs and talk about the best use of the time we have. Again, members are committed to the 7 o'clock start time. That means that when you are finishing a meeting at 10 o'clock, that is late for everybody, and there's another hour in terms of locking up and so forth. So that being the case, I think it's about making the best use of the agenda time. And in terms of information items, us being able to be really candid with, mutually candid, officers and members about why items are on the agenda, because sometimes there may be an undertaking that an item will be raised, you know, from the community's point of view. I'll make sure that's on the agenda. Does that require everyone to go around the table and say something? And is there a way we could move on from that? And could there be, because there are excellent working relationships at Worcester City Council, if I may say so, could there be an understanding around that, that these items are for noting and, you know, there will be 2 or 3 people speaking on them? It's not to say we need to write all that down, but even some of that might just help a little bit. Yeah, those would be my initial thoughts, Chair.
Thank you very much. I've got Jabba and then Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I think it's just we need to acknowledge, I suppose, how we've got here in the first place, and in obviously 70 years since we've had the inception of the committee system, and how far we've come as a result of it, and every member having an opportunity to have a say and an equal say and an equal weighting in terms of that has generated the great stuff that we're doing and the great results that we're achieving and the amount of committee work that has come as a result of it. So it's been I suppose, a blessing and a curse in a way in terms of the amount of work that we've generated for ourselves. So, you know, it's a reality. The reality of that is in the sense that why we're here today reviewing that. My fear of this governance process has always been around, obviously, the lack of time that we are going to be spending on items, obviously in terms of agenda management, but that's for us to, as councillors, to go back and make sure that we've thoroughly read our reports. We are very focused on the questions that we're asking, and the other issue I also had at the start of this process was around, obviously, scrutiny and the level of scrutiny that we get. And I'm actually satisfied now that actually the level of scrutiny that we do have in and around the table of self-governance from opposition groups is sufficient enough for us to know that, balanced with obviously officer checks and balances, that actually we are doing a pretty good job in terms of that. So the review is absolutely needed. The irony is, of course, that, you know, lo and behold, 2 years' time, we're going through a local government reorganisation, and actually that's probably going to take as much time as we managed to reduce going forward in terms of how that kind of outlies. So yeah, it's absolutely needed, not only for health and well-being of all of us around this table, but from an officer and a Guildhall perspective, that we just do things more efficiently and better and quicker. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. I mean, I'm quite happy with the recommendation to let somebody else make the decision. And I do personally favour a reduction in the number of committee meetings, maybe rather than the number of committees. But there is the option, of course, that when we want to talk about these reports and issues that Karen mentions, that we could actually just create the opportunity to do that. You know, you don't have to, task and finish panel, I think I don't like the terminology, but, you know, you could just actually pull together people in a meeting to discuss that particular item and come up with some decision about it, some publicity about it, some detail or whatever. So we needn't be hidebound by the strictures of 3 meetings or 5 meetings or whatever it might be. You know, try and be a bit flexible. I mean, you'd like to think maybe that one of the really successful things about local government reorganisation would be an increased democratisation. And a key factor in that, in my view, is to force employers to allow local councillors to do local council work during their work time. And that would reduce the need for evening meetings like this one, and mean that those people who did work could still maintain a normal working life and normal working benefits, as well as being able to represent their local area. But I doubt that is within the purview of the reorganisation they've got. That's not probably in their remit. Maybe we should stick it in.
I think it's a very valuable point to raise. I mean, the English devolution, it is a white paper. There are lots of conversations going on and lobbying, and that will shape the draft legislation when it actually comes forward. And certainly in some of the briefings and meetings that I've been in is if you're looking at unitarisation, and that for some of the, is being a councillor going in some places going to require more of a full-time job or more of a kind of professional input of itself. So, people are thinking about that, and I think, to actually ask employers to support the sort of civic duty of their staff would be an interesting addition to it. Thank you. Karen?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. But I do agree, but there's also the possibility for public participation, and again, a lot of people do work during the 9 to 5, 5 days a week. So it also would possibly stop members of the public being able to come to an evening meeting and speak. I mean, I think you'd need to have a blend. I think it's Cirencester starts their meetings at 5 or something like that, so they do go on into the evening. Maybe you have the public participation towards the end or something like that. But it's just that we're used to this structure. We're going to have to get used to a new structure. So maybe if we made some minor changes and adjusted our budget, it will make us all, because I assume we're looking for budget adjustments through it, then we'll be in a healthier situation.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further hands. Yeah, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that democracy is alive and well in Worcester City Council. And you look at the level of participation and in elections and in debates, and that, policy issues are debated, and the democratic voice is really important in this chamber, within this council. And I'll just maybe kind of draw attention to paragraph 3.17, which is the feasibility of using the assembly room for council meetings. Because it's not an elephant in the room, because I think we've talked about local government reorganisation at several points this evening. But a unitary council, as to whatever particular geographic shape it has, is likely to have more than the 35 councillors on it that we have here, probably more than the 57 that are part of the county council. And there's a really, a very real challenge about the practicalities of getting that number of councillors in one room. And we have a magnificent room. So I think it is both about now and, for this council, and the sort of space available for ourselves and the public on occasions, and some future proofing there. I've just seen, sorry, Hannah, you wanted to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I really welcome the way County Council is running at the moment in terms of it touring around different districts, because I think it's really important for county councillors to see how different towns and cities and villages and etc. across the whole of the county, because they're making decisions about the whole of the county. But the meetings aren't held here, and I think it's really important that we get revenue from the county council in terms of having this as a venue space, but also in terms of county councillors coming to Worcester, seeing the Guildhall, seeing our High Street. And I think that having meetings in the assembly room and having that as an option would be a really good way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a good point. If only they were still able to meet in the HQ that was built. Moving on. So recommendations in this report that the committee considers the outcomes from the initial work on the governance review and delegates authority to the monitoring officer in consultation with political group leaders to develop preferred options for implementation for referral directly to full council. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for their contributions to that debate. It's valued. So the next item is procurement of temporary employment agency.
Thank you, Chair. This report is before the committee tonight because in terms of our contract procedure rules in the Constitution, procurements above the still EU procurement threshold, soon to be UK procurement legislation, the new Procurement Act. But anyway, contracts above a certain financial threshold need a committee mandate before the procurement is undertaken. We're at the point in our cycle where we need to procure our next agency workers managed service provider contract. So I'm seeking authority to award a contract from one of the pre-procured frameworks. You may have heard of ESPO, the Eastern Shires Purchasing Organisation, for a maximum term of 4 years. Chair, shall I just briefly explain what a managed services contract provider is? It's a bit of a mouthful. So the council's use of agency staff is across the board. Because of our budget position, it really relates to absences. It doesn't relate to just additional staff. It relates to covering a short or a long-term absence due to somebody leaving or sickness. We have a large operational workforce, as you know. We have a lot of business critical roles. An agency contract is essential for us to maintain service provision. And it is entirely normal for a local authority to have an agency services contract. And in fact, that's why there is a pre-set up framework on the Eastern Shires Purchasing Organisation, which is a local authority purchasing framework. What it means to have a managed service provider is that the local authority is dealing with one supplier. So in terms of sourcing agency requirements, for a lot of roles, it doesn't perhaps include interim colleagues working at a senior level. They tend to have to be procured through different agency routes, but most of our agency day-to-day staff needs can be met by approaching one supplier who has a number of temporary workers registered on their books, can also source additional workers through other agency arrangements if necessary. The service provider that we deal with does all the employment checks, rights to work in the UK, and where necessary also does a pre-employment screening, health screening for us. And the relationship is obviously well recognised as well by HMRC Revenue and Customs in terms of the worker status and the payroll implications of all of that. So it's a well set up arrangement. Clearly what we do is we pay a fee for that service. So when we say that the value that we spend on agency staff per year is X, and we've put that in the report, in an average year, 500,000, that's probably a higher year. That means all of the agency staff costs, as well as the fee to the supplier. The supplier is a percentage fee. So I didn't want you to think we're spending, £500,000 a year with the supplier. It's covering the agency wages within that cost. The report outlines some of those financial principles in a little bit more detail. We've shown the breakdown of spend over the last few years, so you can be assured that we have control of this budget. In reality, agency spend is approved at head of service level, and relevant directors do have a look at the agency spend per service area, and HR colleagues give us a breakdown to check, so there is oversight of the local arrangements that are being put in place. So as I say, seeking approval to let another 4-year contract for a single supplier route, and we'd like to get that process underway shortly. The reference in the report to making a direct award simply means once there is a pre-procured framework in place, you can choose a supplier off that framework without having to do a further procurement. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that explanation. I'm seeing some hands up. Pat and Robin.
Thank you, Chair. I think that was a very welcome explanation, Sian, because so often when you think of agency workers being employed, and I think of the NHS, for example, their costs spiral out of control the moment they start doing that. I think what you said to us, and do correct me if I'm wrong about this, there are several reasons for doing this. One is that you reduce procurement costs. You get access to a wider choice of agencies and therefore to a wider market. It adds resilience to our workforce. At the same time, it does not drive down wages, terms and conditions of workers who come to us via agencies or of our existing workers. So am I correct in all of those assumptions from what I've seen?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Agar. Yes, I would absolutely endorse what you've said. And it just reminded me of one further point as well, that it has actually, in a number of cases, led into a good route into permanent employment at the local authority,
Yes.
particularly in operational roles,
Yeah.
where sometimes there is at least a perceived barrier in terms of applying through a website cold for a job and doing all of that paperwork. If somebody has worked for us, come through an agency route first, we will still ultimately put them through a recruitment process and do background checks to make them a permanent employee. But by that time, they have the confidence of having worked perhaps in an operational role here and feel more confident and invested in applying for a permanent role. And there are anecdotally a good number of examples of that happening. So it's actually acted informally as another route into permanent recruitment for us.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks for the report. Within the framework, is there position for being able to choose, say, a local provider, or say that there's a preference for a local provider, rather than having somebody, you know, based in London with a branch here, profiting from our council tax?
Through you, Chair. So the framework doesn't provide any weighting around local provision. No, the framework providers are largely national organisations. However, the workforce they supply is largely very local.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I wondered if ESPO's Scope 3 emission, are Scope 3 emissions accounted for ESPO's carbon footprint, please? Thank you.
So ESPO is a trading name of Leicestershire County Council, it acts as a consortium of councils coming together to jointly procure in the market. So in terms of the carbon credentials of Leicestershire County Council, I don't know, I'd need to look. Because we're procuring from the framework, we don't make any particular requirements of this provider, whoever we choose from the framework, around carbon or net zero. And in truth, I would struggle to see even if we did an individual procurement, how we could weave that in, I guess, in terms of they provide quite a remote service to us, if you know what I mean. It's sort of not quite a desk-based service, but it's a bureau type service. No, I have to be honest and say it's not something we've directly considered, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, for the follow-up question. So they have published their net zero credentials. I just wondered if we can include that in our own Scope 3 emissions as part of our supply chain. Thank you.
Chair, I'll be very happy to follow up afterwards and make sure I've fully understood. And the procurement team are obviously very keen to make sure that we are looking for the opportunities through our purchasing. So yeah, I'll follow up.
Yes, oh, is okay. Yeah, Chair, sorry. Just from a personal point of view, I used to work for Leicestershire County Council, and they were using ESPO then, back in the day, and they certainly saved a lot of money. And in my life outside politics, I worked for a local company, and they have a lot of academies who are customers, and a lot of them use ESPO, and a lot of them have them as a direct link as a supplier, because they really do save a lot of money. So from past experience over many years, they come quite recommended, and they do provide good savings. So just a bit of a shout out for ESPO, if you don't mind.
Thank you, that's reassuring. Karen, did you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just very, would they actually be based in Leicester? Would they be working remotely, or would they find people that live locally?
So the supplier we will procure will be an agency supplier. ESPO is just the purchasing organisation that's done the pre-procurement for us.
Okay, it's technical appreciation how these things work, but it sounds good. So well done. And I just kind of want to say it is quite interesting to look at the table in paragraph 2.7 and, you know, over a period of a number of years, actually, our spend on agency staff has not escalated, you know, and that indicates good control and probably also that we are a good employer. And, you know, if people come to work for us substantively, you know, we have good terms and conditions and better than some of our neighbours and peers. And I guess now that is part of the picture of our need and our use of agency staff potentially. So yeah, well done to everybody. So the recommendation that the committee delegates authority to the Corporate Director for Planning and Governance to award a contract for the provision of agency staff for a maximum of term of 4 years through an Eastern Shires Purchasing Organisation framework. All those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm not aware of any other business, in which case declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much. Thank you.